In the Arctic, a group of workers is digging deep inside a frozen cave. Suddenly, they find something stuck in the ice. They cut out a large block to take it out and send it by helicopter to a lab. The scientists quickly send a fax to the excavation company. They say there has been a very important archaeological discovery and ask them to stop drilling. They also request a specialist to study whatever is inside the ice block. A little while later, an anthropologist named Stanley arrives at the lab. Stanley is a doctor who knows a lot about the Arctic because he has studied the history and culture of Eskimos. He meets Dr. Diane and the other scientists who think they've found a prehistoric animal. In 1898, the Russians found a mammoth with live cells, so they are hopeful about their discovery. The scientists decide to carefully cut the ice block with a laser to avoid damaging the creature inside. To their surprise, the thing inside is not an animal, but a Neanderthal. Stanley looks at him closely and guesses he was a hunter who lived around 20,000 to 40,000 years ago. Stanley wants to examine the caveman further, but Diane explains their plan is to cut him into pieces and send them to the best research centers around the world. Afterward, the scientists begin to thaw the Neanderthal and remove his clothes and tools to take tissue samples. They also hook him up to a bypass and monitor his brain with electrodes. The tests show that the Neanderthal's cells and organs are in perfect condition. Diane suggests that ancient humans might have had cryoprotectants, special cells that prevent their bodies from freezing. While they continue testing, the scientists are shocked to notice some light brain activity coming from the Neanderthal. They decide to try to revive him. They intubate him and shock his heart with a defibrillator until they get a strong heartbeat. Once the Neanderthal is stable, they remove the tube and he begins to wake up. The caveman is confused by his new surroundings, the loud noises, and the masked faces of the scientists. He immediately panics. Stanley removes his mask, and the caveman calms down when he sees a human face. This allows the others to give him a sleep injection. The scientists then discuss what to do with the Neanderthal. They hope to use him for their research on immortality by freezing people and unfreezing them when a cure for diseases like cancer is found. Stanley disagrees with the idea, arguing that humans shouldn't live forever and that the world is already overpopulated. His concerns are ignored, and the scientists decide not to tell the press about the Neanderthal for now. They don't want him to become a celebrity. Stanley believes the caveman should first be studied in a natural environment, which would teach them more about prehistoric times. After much pleading, Stanley convinces the team to let him have 2 weeks to conduct his own research. A special vivarium is set up, and the Neanderthal is placed inside. When he wakes up, he feels like he's in a familiar place and starts going through his usual routine. He drinks juice from berries to quench his thirst and chases a bird away from its nest to steal the eggs. In the evening, he makes a fire with stones and cooks his food. Every morning, he washes himself under a waterfall before hunting with a spear he makes himself. One day, while hunting, he makes noise to attract a wild boar. The boar charges at him, but the caveman dodges just in time and the boar gets stuck between rocks, allowing him to kill it. Later, while fishing, he accidentally finds a hose and gets confused by the metal. After sniffing and licking it, he starts pulling it from the ground and follows it until he finds a metal door. He shakes it, trying to open it, and the scientists quickly close another door to stop him from going through. The animals in the lab start making noise, and the scientists try to scare the Neanderthal back into the vivarium. Furious, the Neanderthal climbs up the waterfall and starts attacking the machine that powers it. He tries to break the machine and hits the wall, so a scientist shoots him with a tranquilizer dart. They put him on a stretcher and take him to the operation room to take more samples. Stanley is upset and reminds the scientists that his 2 weeks aren't over yet, but Diane tells him to accept the situation. Later, Stanley shows Diane a video of different tribes that can dance on hot coals without feeling pain, but Diane says it's just a nerve block. Stanley points out that it also explains why they don't get blisters. He fast-forwards the video to show an indigenous man putting needles in his friend's face without bleeding. Stanley believes they are producing a chemical that protects their tissue, and he thinks the Neanderthal might have a similar chemical. He convinces Diane to let him study the caveman some more. Stanley enters the vivarium without any tools or weapons to avoid scaring the Neanderthal. The caveman is scared and starts running around, growling. Stanley approaches slowly until they are face to face. After a moment of hesitation, the Neanderthal jumps at Stanley with a rock, but he gets distracted by a scientist yelling from above. Since Stanley doesn't fight back, the caveman stops and looks closely at him. He starts touching Stanley, pulling at his clothes, and even squeezing his groin. Stanley yells in pain and the caveman backs off. The Neanderthal introduces himself as Aru, which Stanley changes to Charlie. Stanley teaches him to say his name and even makes him laugh. Charlie points to the scars on his chest and calls them Beta, pointing up. Stanley thinks Beta means bird. Charlie takes Stanley's cross necklace and bites it before repeating some words and gestures, though Stanley doesn't understand. The next day, linguist Mabel arrives, and Stanley shows her a recording of his conversation with Charlie. Mabel needs more time to fully understand him, but Stanley continues spending time with Charlie, learning simple words like rock, frog, and bone. Charlie shares his food with Stanley, and in return, Stanley teaches him English words. Mabel watches everything through the cameras and is impressed by how many words Charlie knows. One night, as they sit by the fire, Stanley sings a song, and Charlie joins in, making sounds as he plays with bones. The scientists continue to take more samples from Charlie and put him in a chamber at a low temperature to activate the cryoprotectants. Stanley protests, saying they're killing Charlie, but the scientists ignore him. When they try to freeze Charlie, his heartbeat slows down and they quickly take him out. In the vivarium, Charlie gets angrier. He jumps and pretends to attack Stanley, but he points to his chest and asks for Stanley's help to end his life. Stanley refuses, and after a struggle, he leaves the vivarium. Later, Stanley asks Diane for help. He feels that all the testing is causing Charlie to become more distant and less like the Neanderthal he first met. Stanley wants to go into the vivarium with Diane, thinking that Charlie might react better to a woman's presence. When they enter, Charlie has injured his hands and is drawing the bird shape from his scars on the ground. Diane is scared when Charlie runs up to her, but she eats the food he offers to avoid offending him, even though it's made of bugs. Charlie starts touching Diane and soon tries to look at her groin. Stanley stops him, and a confrontation occurs. Charlie offers Stanley objects from his cave to trade for Diane, but Stanley refuses. Charlie is upset and repeats the same words over and over. Mabel analyzes the words and thinks she's found Charlie's word for woman. Charlie also starts drawing on the ground, showing he once had a wife and children. He starts asking where they are, and the scientists realize he's searching for his family. The moment is interrupted when Charlie sees a helicopter above the vivarium. He climbs the rock screaming, "Bata," thinking it is a bird from his beliefs. The scientists try to make the helicopter leave, but Charlie doesn't calm down. Later, Stanley visits an Eskimo tribe and shares the words Charlie used. The tribe recognizes them, and Stanley rushes back to the lab with the discovery. He explains that Bita refers to Sedna, the legend of a large bird who is believed to carry people to heaven or hell based on their behavior. Stanley believes Charlie's tribe went extinct when the magnetic pole shifted, causing the animals to die, and Charlie thought it was a punishment from God. Stanley believes Charlie is waiting for the bird to bring back the animals. 34 hours later, Charlie is fully dressed in clothes and tools Stanley gave him, and he decorates his body with crushed berries. He continues chanting and waits eagerly for the return of the bird. Stanley enters the vivarium, but Charlie hides from him. One day, Charlie sneaks out of the vivarium and carefully moves through the lab, avoiding the scientists. He finds a mirror and breaks it, thinking the reflection is challenging him. He then runs through the lab, gets scared, and causes chaos. He crashes into a glass door, but it opens automatically, allowing him to keep running. Charlie eventually makes his way to a tunnel and finds a fire exit. He leaves the lab and chases the helicopter, shouting, "Bita!" The pilot hits him with the helicopter's skis to knock him out. The scientists rescue Charlie and bring him back inside. X-rays show that Charlie has no broken bones or head injuries, but the scientists are angry with Stanley, blaming his research for the death of a colleague. They announce the experiments are over, and Charlie will be sent to another facility. Stanley argues that if Charlie stays in a cage, he will die, but the scientists ignore him. Determined, Stanley makes a secret deal with the guard and sneaks Charlie out. They walk together, but when they reach an ice shelf, a crevasse opens, separating them. The helicopter finally finds them, and Charlie, excited, jumps towards it, holding on to the skis. When the pilot tries to reach him, Charlie lets go and falls, gliding happily before meeting his end. Thank you for watching. Click like and subscribe to support the channel.